Hello everyone, RJ Conti here, on this beautiful Sunday afternoon, wanting to share with you my thoughts of the movie Unplanned yesterday. And I've made this public so that you can share it, and hopefully we can get more word out about this movie, especially since so many channels and groups of people have tried to shut it down or refuse to advertise it, and it seems to be spreading and gaining traction through social media. And so I think that that's a great way to share about it. So many of my friends have not seen the movie yet and have asked my opinion on what I thought about it. And so I decided to just go ahead and post an entire video explaining my thoughts on the movie. So, it was very hard to watch. There was not a single aspect of it that was enjoyable. I recommend not going with a full stomach. I cried. I lost count of how many times I cried, and I am not a crier in public ever, nor do I cry at movies. But it felt a lot more like an expose or documentary than it did a true narration or movie. And it spared no one in showing all the detail. So anyway, I will give you all of my thoughts, and then obviously there are spoiler warning here, but I'll give you all of my thoughts, and then at the end, if you want to ask any questions, especially if you're thinking about going and seeing it, you or your kids or family members, then I can answer any questions. So be aware there will be spoilers, but this is not really a, oh, don't spoil it for me, I want to know the plot type of movie. This is something that is a spoiler. Like, the whole entire movie is an expose, is a truth-telling shocker of what's actually going on in our country. So there aren't a lot of spoilers in that sense of the word. These are things that everybody needs to know. On the whole, it was not a Christian movie. Yes, God is portrayed as just, as sovereign, as merciful. Christians are portrayed very, very well, almost to the point of saccharine type sweetness that maybe is not as realistic as it should be. But on that front, I was pleased. There is a pastor who preaches from the Psalms about, he knit me together in my mother's womb. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And a young woman 2 rows down from me burst into spontaneous applause when he started preaching. So there is some scripture. There is nothing about Christ or Jesus. There is not the gospel. We don't see a salvation story. And I'm not sure that's actually a bad thing in this case, which sounds terrible for me to say because I think that the gospel should always be shared. But the point is not to make a Christian movie in this case. I think the gospel should always be shared, and I think they missed an opportunity to share the gospel, but that was not their point. Kind of like the man who went into Planned Parenthood with the hidden cameras, and the girls who did to expose the selling of baby body parts. I think that this had a similar idea of just being an expose and telling this one woman's true story. So Elizabeth asking, is it a Christian movie or just pro-life? It is a biography. I would say it is a biography. It's a biography about one woman and how she turned from one side to the other. So her story does involve church, does involve a relationship with God, but they don't get into it too heavily. So I'd say kind of neither. It's pro-life, yes. It's a pro-life movie, but it's more of a biography of a Christian woman's life. So the point is not to bring the audience to Christ. The point is to just tell the truth. So in that sense, there was very little hope by the end of it. Adoption was not mentioned once, and that was, I think, the biggest failing in the movie, is that not once did they talk about there are families waiting to adopt your baby. Adoption is an option. Adoption was not mentioned once, which I was shocked. I kept thinking somebody's going to say this, and I have no idea why they kind of had a gag rule about adoption. I have no idea why no one mentioned that. I don't know if that there are so many problems with our foster care and other things going on that people didn't want to. I have no idea. I have no idea. That I thought was a big failing, because as they're standing at the fence trying to give these young women hope on why they should go through with their pregnancies, adoption was never brought up. So to me, that was a humongous flaw on the whole. And yeah, I have no nothing to say about that. I have no knowledge on why that was. I would love to ask somebody why wasn't adoption mentioned. That might have even brought hope by the end, showing maybe some saved babies and their adoptive families. But I guess that may not have been necessarily the part of this woman's biography for some reason. What they did do well, which I think is hugely overlooked, is show us what people who work for Planned Parenthood are going through. And so often we focus on these young girls and young women who are having abortions and their suffering and their shame and all that. And that's a fantastic thing to focus on. But we forget these people who are actually murdering children with their own hands and how they get to this place. And that's what I kind of wanted to talk about. I felt like it was more of a story of anything of psychopathic grooming. And that was fascinating. It was played up subtly, but it was there. Because so much in my head, I think, how does somebody get to this place? I mean, clearly we are all sinners. We are all evil. We all have the propensity for evil inside of us. But how does a woman get to the place of not only being okay with killing her own child, which, a lot of girls go into this thinking it's not a baby, doesn't feel pain. They walk you through how Planned Parenthood lies to them about all of that. But how do these women get to the place of actually murdering other people's children, like actually going through the motions and watching that? I mean, they even show the movie does not spare you whatsoever. They will show you a suction abortion in all its gory detail. They will show you a chemical abortion, which I think was just as awful to watch, because you watch the main woman just blood everywhere as the clumps fall out of her pieces of her baby into the shower, and they pan up to show you her. It looks like a crime scene of blood. They show you the petri dish with the perfectly formed baby. So be aware that the R rating is for a good reason. And it is hard to watch. Like I said, everybody around me was crying. I lost count of how many times I cried. And the men and women, and the woman next to me moaned quite a bit. And you just kind of suffer through it. But you sit there and you wonder, like, okay, there are women who work back in, it could be men too, but I think mostly Planned Parenthood is staffed by women. There are women who work in the back room, and when that canister of blood and child parts is passed through a little door after the abortion operation, they have to sit and count and put together and assemble these babies like a puzzle to make sure that all the parts are out of the girls getting the abortions. I mean, and that to me is just unfathomable evil. Like, I cannot fathom it. And how does a woman get to the place where that can be her everyday job and it doesn't faze her? And I thought that the movie did a really good job of showing how that happens. And I thought that was actually the biggest thing that I learned from watching it, is that you watch this Abby, who I don't know what she is in real life, but the actress portrayed her kind of like an ENFP. She's got a great marriage. I mean, well, okay, I take that back. I'm going to talk about her husband a little bit. He was the most irritating person in the whole movie to me. She has a very loving marriage. She is a wonderful mom. She's got her own daughter herself. And they show that she's a real human being with real emotions, who can, she's not an antisocial Unabomber. She's not a psychopath. She's just an average woman who is trying to make a buck and has ambitions in her career and thinks that she's helping women. She gets roped into Planned Parenthood to help women, so she thinks. And what we see, which was really interesting, is there is a very psychopathic, narcissistic, evil woman in charge of her clinic named Cheryl. And Cheryl has her claws out and she knows what she's doing. And we watch Cheryl groom Abby from day one. You know, it's the push-pull of a manipulative abuser, of the whole, oh, Abby, look at you, you're so amazing, you've got such great potential. And then once Abby gets complacent, lashes out, you did that wrong, how dare you, what are you doing? And then Abby gets, startled and starts to try to be obedient better and do better. And then she's, oh, Abby, look how you fit in with us. Oh, you just fit in, you're wonderful. And then she gets all excited, and then there's the whole lashing out. Abby, how dare you get pregnant? How dare you? You're going to stop being a good worker. You're going to fail me, Abby. And Abby's like, oh, and so we watch Abby's entire career and the numbing and the turning a blind eye to the deaths and the things that she's doing in order to please her hero, which is this older woman, this Cheryl, who is sick. I mean, she's a sick person. And you watch Abby all along. It's this chain of command of woman pleasing other woman, of looking up to her hero, of ignoring things her husband thinks, things her parents thinks, because Cheryl is her hero. And that makes so much sense to me, how women might get suckered into a chain of command sort of thing by manipulative people who know how to play on that people-pleasing aspect that women have. And then you see people under Abby, and Abby doesn't play the narcissist. Abby's not a narcissist. Abby plays the, we're all best friends. Like she calls them, you're my best friends, and you guys have my backs. And then you see the younger nurses, or younger women, not nurses, younger women underneath Abby who are trying to please Abby. And you see this chain of command of women trying to please other women who are being suckered into this lifestyle. And there's fear, oh boy, they're going to get me. They're going to come after me if I leave. They're going to come after me if I admit what I saw. There is a scene where a young lady, a teenage girl, almost hemorrhages to death on the table because the doctor pierced her uterus. That was a horrible graphic scene. And Cheryl just shuts their freaking out down by saying, if you go call an ambulance and if you let anybody know, then we're going to get in the papers and we're going to be shut down and they're going to have ammunition against us. So you better hush up and be quiet. And then there's this chain of command of women who are all controlling and manipulating and grooming the younger women to take their places and to be silent and to shut up and to not speak and to get over it and to put up with this stuff. And that to me was the most heartbreaking, well, was not the most heartbreaking, seeing children die is the most heartbreaking, but that to me was the most interesting and definitely a heartbreaking aspect of this that felt very, very realistic to me, because I have seen and heard of these things being done and seen these things being done where you feel trapped. You feel like this is somebody you've got to please and you're failing somehow, and you better get over your own squeamishness and suck up and be a big girl and do what these heroes are telling you to do. And Abby was working towards that employee of the year and whatever. And I think the most telling scene and the most sickening scene to me, the worst part of the whole movie, is when Cheryl says to Abby, again, big spoilers here, but Cheryl says to Abby, look at how you fit in with us. You were meant for more. You remind me of me, which is like an abuser's highest praise to their victim, right? And so Abby, just puffs up with praise, and she's like, I think you can take the next step now. You get to see the back room. And so Abby is now, her abuser has shined on her, and life is good, and she's going to be a tough girl with whatever comes next because she's all about pleasing her abuser, right? And I say abuser, Cheryl wasn't like living in her home or beating her or anything like that, but there was definite psychological abuse going on in this place of work. And so she takes Abby back to the back room where she gets to see the baby parts in the petri dishes, some of which, they don't show detail except for the one, and they do show you detail. And it is a horrible, breathtakingly horrible moment to see that detail. And Abby goes, "Oh, wow, look at how perfectly formed it is," in that just like completely evil, like just numbed, hardened, perspective. And Cheryl goes, "Oh, look at you. Everybody I bring back here cries, but you're a higher caliber than the rest. You're better than them all. This is why you can be the only one to take my place." And that is like the climax of the abusive relationship. I have groomed you. I have groomed you to be a sociopath like me. I have groomed you. And Abby has pleased the hero. And you just watch this exchange between two, you know, Nazi-like women who are just hardened. The thing about Abby, though, is she is not a full-fledged psychopath like her mentor, and she does have a line that she does not want to cross, and she is shown sitting in a pew at church, and that truth is seeping in there. I do want to talk a minute about her husband. Her husband, I don't know what he was like in real life, but her husband was portrayed as the most irritating and infuriating character in the movie from my perspective, because he's this ultimate pansy. He's portrayed as someone who loves her. I think his one line in the movie basically is, "I love you," over and over again. And his entire life is just to like love her and support her, and he utterly is controlled by her. She wears the pants in the family. She has the last say. He is completely overlooked, and he refuses to fully stand up to her from the get-go, from the moment when they're dating to their relationship, as he allows her to do what she wants to do in this awful career. And he makes comments every once in a while, subtle comments about, "I don't really like this and I'm not really comfortable with this," but he is the man of the house, and he never once says, "I don't want you doing this anymore. This is wrong," as he brings his family to a pew every single Sunday and they hear God's word. And I think you are just as culpable, sir, by not putting your foot down. I mean, you see her parents stand up to her far more than you do her completely wimpy husband. And I was just infuriated with him because his conscience is clearly bothering him, and he refuses to put his foot down. And that was a really big shame, and so in one of the heartbreaking scenes where she is mourning all of the death that she has brought about, he's the one to comfort her, being like, "Well, God will forgive you. God forgives you because he's God." And what should have been a powerful moment, I felt, fell flat because it's coming from him, who stayed out of it basically from the get-go. Every once in a while there'd be a subtle snide comment her direction, and otherwise he stayed out of it. So I felt like that scene fell flat because he was pretty much worthless as a spiritual leader in her life. And I know I'm coming really, really hard down on the husband, but that struck me as just a really, really unfortunate aspect of the movie. Bethany's asking, "Can you imagine being an actress?" Actually, Fox News interviewed the actress, and she was almost aborted herself. And she knows that she will probably be blacklisted by Hollywood for being in this movie. But she just cried as she gave her interview of how much she believes in it. And she is, from what I hear, a Christian herself. So, yeah, more power to her. Anyway, I didn't really buy Abby's transformation at the end. Here she has been counseling girls to get abortions all along, and the movie portrays it that, well, Abby had a line. She wouldn't do abortions past 8 weeks, and she was always trying to give out contraceptives to keep abortions from happening. So once she gets roped into higher and higher up in Planned Parenthood, and here's that Planned Parenthood actually wants to up abortion to 24 weeks, and that Planned Parenthood wants to double the abortions to make more money. And once she has that moment where Cheryl really brings her claws out and attacks Abby, which abusers always do. They look like they love you. They look like they care about you. They look like they're there for you, and really they are grooming you to be their puppet. And as soon as Abby stops being a puppet, then Cheryl lashes out at her. She gets her publicly reprimanded. She comes down super, super hard on her. And I would think that was Abby's turning moment. The movie likes to portray it as that Abby got to see an actual suction abortion, which, to be warned, does happen in the first 10 minutes of the movie, right off the bat. which I don't know if it took some of the shock out of it, because you're just starting to sit down and get into the movie, and so it was kind of just like too soon, I felt like, or if they felt like that would soften the blow because you weren't as emotionally invested in the movie yet. I don't know. But they make it out to be like that's what changed Abby's mind, and I don't buy it, because Abby saw baby parts. I don't buy that actually watching the suction happen and knowing that the baby felt pain is what changed her mind. What I think, and I heard, I need to read Abby Johnson's book, but what I did hear is that she never actually was called in to help with the abortion procedure. So I bet you that I'm right in not really buying it. That didn't feel right to me. She had watched a teen girl she knew almost die. She had seen the baby parts. She had had abortions herself. I don't really buy the fact that she actually helped with the procedure, and that's what broke her into tears and made her quit. I think, if anything, it was watching her abuser turn on her, watching her own line be crossed, and seeing that she was a puppet all along and that Planned Parenthood was downright evil. I think it was the devastation of watching her mentor crush her under her feet as soon as she was done with her. And that seems to fit more in line personally with what I think happens to people psychologically when they've been in a cycle of abuse. And I think it's when that abuse cycle and influence was broken that she was able to see clearly what she was engaged in. And I would love to read her book and see if I'm right on that, if that's actually what happened. And maybe the movie mixed up some timeline on things. Because she seems to have such an overnight 180 that she was so hardened in other things. And it could be that God just touched her heart right at that moment. But maybe I'll give myself some time to to feel better and clear my head, and then I will try that book. Yeah, I probably need a moment first. So anyway, last thoughts. The Christians praying at the fence are portrayed as loving, kind, gracious, that they help these people from not even just getting out of the industry, but in finding them jobs and work. That's just one aspect of this whole process that I didn't think about. I think so much about stopping these women from murdering their children, but I don't think about the aspect of these workers who, like sex traffickers, feel stuck in their jobs, that there is this cycle of abuse, there is this cycle of expectation on them, there is a fear. I mean, Abby was afraid for her and her family's life at one point, and how we can help them get out. And that the movie did really well in showing them that they can get out, and that they can get help, that they can have other jobs, that the law will protect them. And, well, I don't know if the law will always protect them in some cases, as we see some of these cases where, like, bakers are fined hundreds of thousands of dollars for refusing to do gay cakes and stuff. But in the movie it was portrayed as, hey, the law's on your side, don't let them, you can get out. So I have a lot more compassion towards the workers themselves. And yes, I am glad that I saw it. I am glad that I saw it. I do think it needs to be seen. I have friends that are thinking of just buying tickets and not showing up because they can't watch it right now. Just a second. No, please go. Just a minute. No, you're going to have to wait. No, I said no. Please wait. Gotta watch out for my little ones. I don't want them to hear it. And don't want them to hear what I'm saying. I dread the day when they have to find out about this. I definitely think we should promote it. We should share about it. We should, if you feel like you have researched abortion plenty and you know the atrocities and your heart burns warm for the unborn, and that you burns hot for the unborn, and that you have ways that you're ministering and reaching out to stop this Holocaust, then I say you probably don't need to actually see it. Maybe support this company, buy a ticket, share it on social media. You know, obviously it is really, really hard to watch. There was a pregnant woman in my theater alone. I just thought, oh my stars, I could not have watched this pregnant. But if your heart has grown cold or stagnant, or you've gone complacent, or you're not praying enough, or you just want to be reminded of what women are going through, or you want a different and better perspective on what the workers themselves are being brainwashed into thinking and believing and doing, then I would say go, which is kind of the camp I'm in. That I had gotten kind of complacent. And then when the whole New York bill passed last month or 2 months ago, I was thrown in an uproar of like, oh yeah, this is going on, and this is war, and this is serious. And like, if I love to think that if I were living in the Civil War time period, that I would not turn a blind eye to slavery, that I'd be an abolitionist, and I would be fighting for the rights of my fellow human Americans. And I like to think that if I were in World War II and were living in Europe, that I would be hiding Jews and all of these kinds of things. But here I am in the worst Holocaust ever. And, you know, the death toll for the unborn was the highest it ever was last year. And here I am in the worst Holocaust ever. And what do I do? And it's a silent Holocaust. It's silent. It's happening. It's happening where we don't see and we don't know. And it's hush hush. And, Cheryl at one point name drops some big names. Soros and Bill Gates and Warren Buffett are, supporting these extremely wealthy and evil individuals, are throwing money at them all the time. And so it feels like a war that's beyond us. But so did the Holocaust and the Nazis. So did slavery, I'm sure. So did so many of these other things. And it starts with all of us getting involved. In some ways, and there's so many different ways to get involved. There's giving money to our crisis pregnancy centers. There's standing at the gates and praying. Abby did say that when people are standing at the gates and praying, not even having to hold signs or even necessarily talking, but just standing there praying, that the amount of abortions drops by 75% on those days. Or whether it is fostering and adopting ourselves, or whether it is leaving. I've got these 180 movie tracks that have the gospel and talks about abortion, leaving those in places. But there are ways that we can get involved, and that's why I went. I knew it was going to be awful. When I stood up at the end, I felt very faint. I went walking. I had to walk to my car out in the cold air. I went alone because I didn't think I could go with anybody else. It was too traumatic, too personal. I wanted to face that alone. And I walked out to my car in the cold air, and that revived me a little bit. But when I came home, I had to lie down in bed for 20-30 minutes because I did feel like very faint. Like I would be warned if you are a fainting person. I didn't feel like I had to faint in the middle of the movie, but I definitely felt like that at the end. Very sick to my stomach. Didn't want to eat dinner. So be warned, it is really tough, and there's no judgment on anybody who just really thinks they can't see it, especially if they are already pro-life. Their mind is already made up on supporting life and on doing the right thing, and that murder is sin. But I do think we should share it, and I think that different things change different people, and some people are going to be only convinced to protect the unborn by receiving Christ as their Savior. They need salvation, otherwise they're just too hardened. Other people are going to be convinced by a movie like this because the visuals. Other people are going to be convinced by lots of good scientific articles. Other people are going to be convinced by having their own children. There are many, many, many ways that God uses to specifically convince people. And while I do agree that people first and foremost need Christ, while that's the end goal, I don't think that means that we don't actually fight for pro-life, even if people are not Christians. And I think movies like this that are expose documentaries that aren't necessarily happy-go-lucky movies still have a place, because we wouldn't say this about any other kind of crime. We wouldn't say, oh, well, we're not going to stop our bad guys on the streets. We're just going to, leave them a track and share the gospel. Yes, we should be sharing the gospel, but we also have to stop crime. And my dad would bring character booklets, character training into his workplace. And people would sometimes argue with him, like, how can you teach character to unbelievers? Like, that's just pointless. You should only be sharing the gospel. And while I do think the gospel should be shared, and the gospel is first and foremost important, my dad also felt like it was very valuable to actually teach character, whether they became Christians or not. Like, this is the standard of which we have in our workplace, and you need to learn to at least mimic good character. Otherwise, you're going to be fired. And so I think there's a value in at least saying, we hope you come to know Christ. We'd love to share the gospel with you, but you got to stop murder regardless. And that's my opinion. You may disagree. But while we are evangelizing, I think we can also just give people the details. If this is too hard of a movie for you and you want something more, or it's too adult for younger teens and you want something more narrative and less gory, but also very, very powerful, I recommend October Baby, which is one of my favorites. And it's the story of an abortion survivor. And it is really well done. It's not a true story, but it makes a lot of sense. It's very similar to what we've heard abortion survivors talk about. And it is a powerful narrative that is much more accessible, I think, to younger teens without showing the gory details, but they do talk through some gory details. And that is also a fantastic way to convince people that abortion is wrong. I highly recommend October Baby. And yeah, there is a moment, like I said, where she is sitting there and the magnitude of how many abortions she has overseen hits her, like 21,000 or something like that. And she just looks at her husband and is like, how can I handle knowing I caused this many deaths? And it just hit me like she's a Nazi army commander. She's a Nazi commander right there. I mean, that's how they feel. Maybe she didn't perform them, like the doctor who sits and curses and couldn't care less about the patients. The doctor who played the doctor in the movie actually was an abortion doctor who came to Christ and turned away from abortions. And so can't even imagine having to revive that role for the movie and having to do that. Be in that role again, and how emotional that must have been for him. He gives an interview with his wife that I haven't watched yet because I couldn't take anything more last night, but I will probably watch it today. But I just thought this is probably how a Nazi commander felt. Like, we have such distaste. That's a very light word. We have such distaste for what the Nazis did in the Holocaust. But we have women, an army of women doing this every day, and male doctors too. I don't want to ignore that, but we have an army of women doing this every day who are sitting there with thousands of murders on their conscience, and we need to be reaching out to them as well, to teach them that the only thing that can save them is Christ's blood covering these atrocious sins, and that we are all sinners in need of a savior. So anyway, that is my movie review. Again, I want to leave you with, I highly recommend you see it if you can stand it. I don't fault you. I still haven't seen The Passion of the Christ. I don't think I could stand it. You kind of have to know your own level there and know that it is rated R for a reason, but definitely promote it and look for ways to help fight this unborn Holocaust. So are there any other questions that I did not answer that you need answered about the movie? If you're still on the fence about seeing it or not, let me know here in the next couple minutes if there are any other questions. And hopefully, let me scroll up here. Bethany's friend wanted to puke the entire first half. Yeah, it's bad all throughout. Trying to think, the first half is probably the worst. Yes, but it's the first half is the worst medically, and the second half is the worst emotionally, as you see all the fallout of this kind of evil. So I cried just as much and felt just as sick in the second half as I did the first. There isn't really any reprieve. Like, there was one comment that was supposed to be funny where a couple of people around me tittered, a little laughter, and I couldn't laugh when it's like, no, there's really nothing funny in this movie, and there's no way to really work comedy in here. Your friend Bethany said Passion was actually easier to watch. It just probably depends on the thought of Jesus, my God taking my sins brings me to my knees. I don't know. Yeah. But yet he is Christ who went willingly to the cross to die for us. And these children are being murdered against their, against their little will. So yeah, I can see how one would be harder than the other. Yeah, I definitely cried through the whole thing too, Valerie. But the good thing is that you're with a group that will cry with you. Everybody around me was crying too. And sometimes we'd look at each other and there was a camaraderie as probably a lot of believers, but as human beings crying together for life. And so in the same way, I'd recommend going to a Holocaust museum at least once in your life to cry over the sins of other people, that, to value the lives lost. I feel kind of the same way about this, that I think we need to feel something. I think a lot of us do feel something, though. Like I said, if you feel like your heart is already hot for this issue, and you don't need it poked or stabbed to get you back caring about the unborn, then maybe you don't need this movie. Any other questions? Yeah, I couldn't really speak for a long time. I just felt like the need to be silent. Have a moment of silence, a long moment. All right, well, if there are no other questions, feel free to leave any in the comments and I'll try to answer them. Sorry that I have such gory details on this video. And like I said, a lot of spoilers, but yeah, like I said, Valerie, there was a lady in the audience who was pregnant. I mean, like largely pregnant. And I just thought, oh my stars, I cannot imagine seeing this movie either pregnant or with a newborn. Yeah. There are definitely periods of your life where you feel like far more emotionally vulnerable. So I get it. Definitely don't do anything that would be too hard on you. But anyway, I think we should pray for the success of this movie. Pray for the movie makers. Pray for the actors. And that they would not be attacked. There's some big people who probably want to attack them. I'm shocked the movie got out like it did, because they just lay it on the line with Planned Parenthood. The no bars hold. They just give it to them. They sock it to them in the face, and good for them. That shows a lot of courage. All right, well, have a wonderful rest of your day. It's wonderful knowing there are so many of you that love the Lord and love children with me. That we are together. There was an aspect of knowing that here I am in the liberal Pacific Northwest and my theater was full and people were clapping, and that these are Christians. There are Christians everywhere. We're not alone. So let's continue to fight the good fight. Thanks, guys.